The woman stared for a long time into the basin of water in which the candle lights were reflected. There was a damp odor of pine and herbs in the air. She glanced at the mirror lying there, covered with a black cloth. Making up her mind was harder than she thought. Closing her eyes, she took a moment to visualize past events, and her resolve strengthened. She took the mirror and dipped it into the water. The water rippled, turned cloudy, blackened. Before the woman's eyes, all the blackness and murkiness of the water seemed to be absorbed into the mirror. After a few moments, the water became transparent again, and the mirror became ordinary. Now it was no longer just a hand mirror, but a deadly weapon. The woman smiled contentedly and extinguished the candles. Maryana sat on the steps of the old village house holding a mug of hot tea. The sun was almost over the horizon. It was time to put Lita to bed. The woman had come to the village for the summer, to her grandmother's old house. The daughter was 4 years old, and she was inquisitive and very independent. Mara's husband, as the family called her, worked in the city and was going to the village for the weekend. Alexei, Mara's husband, earned well and provided for his wife and daughter. He had long wanted to buy a house outside the city to spend vacations and weekends there. But his wife was persistently drawn to her grandmother's house, and she did not look at others. In the village, Lisha was not more than a couple of times. All was no time, but here he vowed to his wife and daughter to spend the weekend with them. In fact, Mara grew up in this house, with her grandmother, grandfather, and red cat. The girl's mother drowned when the child was 3 years old. The father abandoned his daughter when she was still an infant. Grandmother and grandfather did not dote on Maryana. The girl received a higher education as a pharmacist, worked in her specialty. After a while she met Lusha, so their small family appeared. Grandfather by that time was no longer there. The grandmother died when the great-granddaughter was a year old. Everything in this house was familiar, dear, and beloved. The summer promised to be pleasant with weather. After her grandmother's death, Mara didn't plant a vegetable garden. She bought everything from the locals and at the store. "Maryashka, is that you?" a woman's voice called out to Mara. The voice seemed familiar and she turned around. "Hello, Zoya." Mara immediately recognized her school friend. Once they sat at the same desk, lived on the same street, and in fact grew up together. Only then their fates went in different directions. Their last meeting was about 7 years ago. Zoya had gone to work on the other side of the country, and if at first they had communicated, then over the years the communication had come to naught. Now Mara was very surprised to see her friend. Zoya looked good, manicure, haircut. "How are you?" Mara asked. "Yes, like everyone else." "And you for the summer?" Zoya asked. "Yes, my daughter is here, and my husband will come this weekend," Mara answered. They didn't talk long, and Mara hurried home to her daughter. Leaving, she did not see the angry look of her school friend. At home, she cooked dinner, kneaded the dough for the pie. She did not plant a vegetable garden, but there were raspberries, blackberries, cherries, and apples in the garden. Lita played beside her, talking non-stop. In the evening, after putting her daughter to bed, Mara sat with tea on the steps and inhaled the cool evening air. "Are you awake, friend?" Zoya's voice sounded very close by. "Do you want tea?" "No, how did you get here?" Mara asked, not liking Zoya's uninvited arrival, "like when I was a child." "By vegetable gardens," Zoya laughed. At first the conversation didn't go well, but once they remembered their childhood, they couldn't talk enough. They parted after midnight, and in the morning Mara barely woke up. She was frying the second batch of fritters when Zoya came in. The hostess did not pay attention to the insolence of the guest and poured tea. "Not bad pancakes," praised Zoya, dipping the pancakes in a rosette with honey. "And who are you?" "I'm Lita." Mara's daughter was embarrassed. She was not used to noisy socializing. "This is my daughter Lita. I told you about her yesterday," said Mara. "Yes, I remember." Zoya thoughtfully stared at the girl. "She looks like you. Her husband, too." "I don't know him," replied her friend. You'll get to know him soon, he's coming for the weekend, said Mara. Then I'll come in the evening, Zoya said, simply putting the hostess before the fact. And in the evening they sat together eating shashlik and cake that Alexei had brought from the city. Lida ate, played, and fell asleep in her father's arms, and while Mara put her daughter to bed, Lesha and Zoya stayed in the kitchen. Returning, Mara heard the quiet laughter of her friend and the voice of her husband. He told her something. "Here I am," said loudly. Mara returned to the kitchen. For some reason, anxiety settled in her soul. They parted late. Lesha went to see Zoya off, and Maryana cleared the table and washed the dishes. An hour passed, but her husband was still gone, and the woman got worried. Alexei's phone was at home, lying in the chair. Did he not take it on purpose, or did he forget it? Mara was about to go looking for it and could not decide to leave her daughter alone in the house. The front door slammed. Lesha came. The man passed by his wife and silently went to bed, surprising and offending his wife. In the morning, Mara barely woke up. The sun had not yet risen and her husband was not around. He was neither in the house nor on the street. Through the window, she saw him coming from the direction of Zoe's house. Her first thought was, had he cheated on her with Zoya? He was seeing her for the first time. Alexei had been quiet all day, immersed in himself. He hardly reacted to Mara and her daughter, and if he did, he answered rudely. Mara looked carefully at her husband and was frightened, a blank stare as if it was not him. Zoya did not show up, and by evening Lesha began to pack. "Where are you going?" Mara started. "None of your business," Lesha snapped, his face twisted with anger and hatred. She did not recognize him at all. "Lesh, what's going on? Are you going to Zoya?" continued questioning Mara. "And if into her, then what? She's a real woman, not like you." "Ah, so." Word after word, they had a big fight. And suddenly, Alexei hit his wife with all his might. She fell and lost consciousness. She came to herself with a headache, her daughter was sitting next to her, and her husband was gone. Lesha hit her for the first time in all the years of their life together, and in general, it was the first scandal. Mara looked in the mirror, at the swollen eye, and remembered the completely alien and crazy face of Lesha. Suddenly, she was pierced by an intense pain. Her heart clenched with pain and bombs exploded in her head. What's going on? With difficulty pulling herself together, Mara got out of the bathtub. Lida? Daughter? The woman was afraid that the daughter was frightened by everything that was happening. In response, she did not hear a sound, and the front door was ajar. Mara rushed to look for the child. She was not in the yard, neither was she in front of the house. The woman was walking down the street calling for Lida when she saw her. Zoya stood in the shade of a tree by her yard and stared at Mara absent-mindedly. It was like two predators colliding on the same road. Neither Mara nor Zoya looked away. Suddenly someone called out to Zoya and she was distracted. Mara already realized everything and hurried to find her daughter before it was too late. And Lesha may be too late to save, he turned out to be weak. Lida's mother found her on the bank of the stream. The girl was unconscious and barefoot. Bringing her daughter home, she tried to bring her to her senses. The girl did not come to herself, and the fever only rose. Mara closed her eyes for a moment and as if transported to another world. Grandmother was there. Her grandmother was quickly whispering ancient words of a magical incantation in her ear. Opening her eyes, Mara came back to reality. In an old cupboard, Granny kept recipes for potions, incantations for all occasions, and magical rituals. There too some ingredients were stored in glass jars, and the herbs were in the barn. The thing is that Mara's grandmother was a famous herbalist and witch. She could remove spoilage and cure some diseases. From childhood, she taught Mara her science. That's why Mara went to be a pharmacist, because making medicines is also a kind of magic. Mara collected herbs according to her old habit, processed and stored them in special conditions. The barn is actually more like an old house than it used to be. Then, all sorts of junk were taken down there and it became a barn. Things were different under Mara. Having found the right section in her grandmother's notebook, Mara began the ritual. First of all, she needed to save the child, and then think about her husband. Ordinary medicines will not help here because there was a magical blow, black sorcery. In a couple of hours, Lita came to herself. The fever was gone, but she looked weak. "Mom, where's Dad?" Lita looked at her mother with her huge hazel eyes. "Daddy will be here soon. How are you?" Mara stroked her daughter's head and was ready to kill her former school friend. She didn't yet understand how Zoya had put a spell on her daughter and a Morocco on them, and the husband seemed to be enchanted, or rather, bewitched. That Zoya is capable of such a thing, Mara did not doubt. In the middle of the night, the woman heard someone trying to get into the house. It turned out to be Leisha. Again, glassy-eyed, detached look. Having failed to get into the house, he broke the glass and left again. Lita frightenedly huddled in the corner of the bed, and looking at it, Mara was ready to nail the frightened husband. "Mommy, that scary aunt wants to take Daddy away. To take him away, and not to have us." Lita spoke in a strange wooden voice. "Daughter, how do you know?" Grandma said. The next day, Mara spent the whole day preparing for the evening ritual, trying to keep an eye on her daughter. Alexei didn't come, and Zoya didn't show up either. After putting her daughter to bed, Mara went to the barn to prepare for the ritual. Having put water from the brook on the stove for the potion, she lit a certain number of candles, brought a basin of water and a mirror. The water showed how the matter was. It also can get rid of everything. Having performed the ritual and turned the pocket mirror into a deadly weapon, Mara smirked contentedly. Her sorceress powers were awakening in her. At dawn, Mara heated the bath, woke her daughter and bathed her, then herself, in a decoction of incantatory herbs. It became easy and good, and most importantly calm. After feeding her daughter breakfast, Mara asked her neighbor to stay with her until tomorrow. The neighbor agreed, and Lita left with her. Now it is possible, at least for her daughter, not to worry. That same evening, Mara performed the ritual of calling the witch doctor. No sooner had she said the last words than there was a knock on the gate. "Well, hello, girlfriend." Mara smiled in the darkness, and Zoya felt creepy. The old friend seemed to be transformed. She smelled of strength. "Hello to you too. What do you want?" Zoya said. She stood still and did not enter the courtyard. "For what?" Mara asked. Zoya laughed, and then, fixing her hair, spoke. "And why not? You always have everything, even beauty, and that you got it. You had everything in your childhood, you got an education, you got a husband, a good child. Let me have a gram of happiness too. I'll take your husband." Zoya spoke frankly. "What about Lita?" Zoya hesitated and then blurted out. "Leisha loves her daughter very much," she reluctantly replied. "You're a psychopath. Monster! Did you fall in love with Leisha at first sight? Exactly. He's just what I need. I loved him instantly." Zoya looked like a fury. Mara looked at Zoya with pity and even felt a little sorry for her. But the punishment was inevitable. Zoya could not cross the line of broken bricks and salt. It was a security magic system. Maryana took out an enchanted mirror, opened it, and called out to Zoya. She looked into the mirror, saw herself, and turned very pale. Her face seemed to have shrunk, aged, became listless and indifferent. There was emptiness in her eyes. "Goodbye, my friend," Mara whispered. Zoya turned sharply and walked away. She walked as if she had swallowed a steak, her back straight, her gaze fixed somewhere in the distance. Like a robot, the woman walked in a direction only she knew. Mara walked out of the courtyard and gave Zoya a glance. She wouldn't hurt them now. Harsh, maybe, but everything has to be paid for. And so does stolen happiness. Maryana and her daughter were returning from the forest with baskets of herbs and roots. Alexei stoked the sauna and waited for his girls. He had almost no memories of that terrible week, only broken fists and small cuts that proved his wife's words. But he remembered well how Maryana had drunk him with herbal infusion, read incantations to remove the spell and the spell. He then saw a real photo of Zoya and was horrified. He was looking at a frankly not beautiful woman. Now he was glad that Mara learned a lot from her grandmother and was able to save him and his daughter. Lita woke up from nightmares for several weeks but physically recovered fully. Unlike her father, she remembered everything, which upset her mother. They did not talk about Zoya. She was still missing and after the proper time was recognized as dead. Jealousy, envy, that's what drove Zoya. I feel sorry for her as a human being. No one really close to her, just anger. I've known she could do magic since I was a kid. Back then, when I was young, it seemed fun and interesting, Mara used to say to her husband. I don't feel sorry for her. Did she learn to do bad things on her own? Her grandmother was an enemy of mine. In fact, they were against each other all their lives, till the day they died. Zoe's grandmother maimed people and livestock, sent pestilence on livestock, not crops for fun. And my grandmother was saving, cleaning up all this blackness. So it turned out that Zoe and I became friends, although here the grandmothers unanimously approved the friendship. I think it's because we're like night and day, black and white, equilibrium. And Zoya's had a lot of fates in her life, and she's had a lot of deaths. How do you know? I have a gift. If a man kills someone, even if not on purpose, he stinks. The horrible smell of damp earth and blood, if there's even a hint of that odor, I stay away. Zoe didn't smell? I didn't smell it while the spell was on, but when you hit me, it was like I came to my senses and started acting up. But why did she lash out at Lita? You killed her yourself if she was not gone, said Lesha passionately. Mara only smiled. Lita is your blood, and blood is not water. Yes, and the child with you, we were united into a whole. Yeah, so much for the school friend, it's all in the past, let's go and have tea. Lita was telling Dad something, and he listened attentively. And Mara looked at her loved ones and smiled. It's good that everything ended this way. Maryana decided not to give up magic, but to start developing her abilities, just in case.